Washington Journal continues.
Welcome back. We are joined now by Frank Luntz, pollster and communications strategist. We're going to discuss campaign 2024. And if you were watching last week, there was the first debate, presidential debate of the 2024 campaign. Frank, welcome to the program. We're going to talk about that debate. On Thursday, while that debate was happening, you had a focus group. Tell us who participated and how they were selected.
It was actually a very difficult effort because trying to find truly undecided voters is just about impossible. And what I mean by that is somebody will say, well, I don't know who I'm voting for. And when you ask them, I would never vote for Donald Trump, but I'm still not sure about Joe Biden, or vice versa. And that's not an undecided voter. They've already written off one of the candidates. So we had to find people who would truly be willing to vote for either Trump or Biden. And in some cases, their preference was Robert Kennedy Jr. And they had to be willing to go back and forth. Second, they had to be genuine floating or swing voters, which means they had to vote for Democrats and Republicans over the last 10 years. Third is that we saw, and most of our people had either voted for Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump or Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So they'd actually voted opposite in 2016 and 2020. And lastly, they were only from the key swing states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, or Arizona. And in fact, we included Minnesota as a potential participant because that state has narrowed so much in the last month or 6 weeks. So these are genuine swing voters from genuine swing voter states, and it was a fascinating experience. By the way, we started, and I apologize for going on, but the methodology is so important. We started for about 30 minutes asking them, why the heck can you still be a swing voter between Trump and Biden? They're so different in demeanor, they're different in policy, they're different in attitude, in record. And the answer is that they truly don't like either of the candidates, that these are double negatives. I think you probably heard that phrase before. They really don't believe that either candidate is preferable, and they're trying to choose the lesser of two evils. And it was a fascinating experience.
So once you found those people in a haystack, explain what happens during a focus group like that. What is happening throughout the evening?
So the first thing is to get everybody suited up, which means they have to look good in their boxes. We've stopped doing, for the most part, we've stopped doing live focus groups because that's just one city or one community. And I want to show the American people the entire country. And I also want to make sure that they're truly undecided. So I'll ask them a few questions before we start, because I want to be able to stand behind this research. If we're going to make a conclusion, I want to be absolutely sure of that conclusion. You know, I used to be a partisan pollster back when I first got started in the 1990s, probably up till about maybe 10 years ago. And I decided that that's not who I wanted to be, and it's not what the American public needed most. You have all these pundits who come on the air after the debates, and you know exactly what they're going to say. Although this time, one of the candidates was so ineffective that we had some surprising commentary. But I'm talking to my participants, making sure they're undecided. Frankly, I give them a little bit of a hard time. I push them because I want to know what they really think, not what they want to project. Then they go and watch the debate, and in the commercial breaks, I get them back in. I get them to give me conclusions, which are the tweets that you saw going all through the night. I'll do it the same with the next debate. I want voters at home to be able to know how these undecided voters are reacting. I don't have the ability to show it to them, although this time I invited some reporters to watch all the way through, because I wanted them to get a genuine feel of who these people are, what makes them undecided, and what's causing them to shift. Then the debate ends. We talk to them for about 45 minutes afterwards, and I got to tell you, I started doing this in 1992. I forgot about this. I thought there's an op-ed that I wrote for the New York Times that was published about a week ago. I thought I started in 1996. My actual first focus group was 1992. And in all that time, in all the presidential debates that we have done, which is 32 out of 34, I've never had a focus group break as sharply as this one did. I've never had reactions like I had this time. It was just as we're in uncharted political territory right now. My focus group showed how dramatic that was. And frankly, I was amazed, I was startled, and I was just glued to their commentary. I didn't want to hang up with them because they were so articulate and so clear, frankly, so disappointed with what they saw. So basically, if you're watching me right now, no matter what line you're on, the Republican line, the Democrat line, the independent line, you're going to be unhappy with what you hear because our focus group is really unhappy with what they saw on Thursday night.
We're going to get into some of the reaction from your focus group, but we want to invite those callers you just mentioned to join in on the conversation. Republicans, you can call in at 202-748-8001. Democrats, 202-748-8000. And Independents, 202-748-8002. And Frank referenced the tweets that he was putting out Thursday night during the debate. You can find him on X at Frank Luntz if you want to look back at some of those tweets, but we are going to take a look at some of them, including this first one. You tweeted, "Undecided voters will be put to the test tonight. Are they more worried about saving our economy or saving our democracy?" What was the result?
The result was neither, because even though that was a part of the debate, it was actually the decision between Donald Trump's personality, which they do not like, and Joe Biden's presentation, which made them very afraid. And that's why I want to emphasize, Donald Trump did not win that debate. Joe Biden lost it. They did not like Trump's asides, his criticisms, his personal attacks on the president. But they were even more afraid that Joe Biden had so much trouble articulating his point of view, discussing his record, and in several times he did what I just did right there, which is he did not complete a sentence. So it actually became Trump's persona versus Biden's performance, and Biden's performance was seen as coming up short.
And to that point, another tweet from you: "My focus group of undecided voters wants Joe Biden to step aside. They like him and respect him. Most voted for him in 2020, but they want him to go. Tonight was a political earthquake." We've seen more calls like that post-debate. It's unlikely to happen. So where do undecided voters go from here?
Hopefully the chandeliers are close to the ground, and hopefully they don't live in tall condos like I do here in New York. They're very upset, and I don't expect much movement in the polls, just as when Donald Trump was found guilty of 34 felonies, the polls moved less than 2 points. Now that he clearly beat Biden in this debate, I expect the polls to move back towards him, but by less than 2 points. Here's the key. It is in those swing states, and particularly 3 of them, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And what I recommend that C-SPAN do is a show just with voters from Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The other states, Trump has enough of a lead. But in these 3 states, if he doesn't get any of them, he gets 268 electoral votes. You need 270. So Trump must win either Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin. If Biden takes all 3, Biden's still the president. And I believe you're going to see $1 billion of advertising, of campaigning, of just negativity dumped on people over the next 4.5, 5 months, I guess it is. And where do they go? So begrudgingly and so hesitantly towards Trump, unless there's another debate that puts them back into play. And the reason for that is simple. We saw them side by side, Trump and Biden. and the public saw them side by side, saw the comparison, heard the responses. Joe Biden gave a great speech on Friday. It was very impressive. It was the Joe Biden of old, but that was only seen by a few million people. The debate was watched by 51 million people who saw the two candidates side by side. I don't know how you recover from that. And I will tell you that the political class is concerned as heck with Biden's performance. I'm talking to governors. I've got my phone here. Governors, senators, congressmen, because I'm now seen as nonpartisan. And they're asking me, what do we do? But the big impact is among Democratic donors who are absolutely apoplectic about what happened on Thursday night and are scared to death that this is going to reelect Donald Trump. And they're at a loss for what they're going to do.
Let's hear from our audience. We will start with Paul in New York City calling on the independent line. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Hi, Frank. I'm wondering whether or not the focus on messaging over the last several decades, which you help in, I think that you had a book called It's Not What They Say. It's not what you say, it's what they hear, or something like that. I apologize if I got it wrong. But maybe part of the problem is that there's so little effort, it seems, to actually deliver for voters, as opposed to simply trying to message or trying to communicate, as opposed to actually accomplishing things. So we're at a point now where it seems that the majority of people are against either candidate. And I'm wondering whether that's because for decades now, so much hasn't been done for sort of average people, and more has been done for the donor class, because
let me respond. I'm going to ask for the host. I want to respond to as many questions as possible. I now teach at West Point, and I teach my cadets. You don't have to ask the same question twice. Paul, you're correct. And it's one of the things that I've been working on over the last 10 years. It's one of the reasons why I've tried to be much more straightforward and much less partisan. Number one, candidates need to say what they mean. They need to mean what they say, and then they need to do what they say. But here's the issue for this debate. Our focus group was really critical that they kept going back to what they had done, to what they had accomplished, rather than telling voters what they're going to do, what is their agenda, what is their, in the words that they used, what are their priorities. So you're correct, and it's very frustrating to me. And yes, I was a player in it, and I, in some ways, regret that. I really want the focus to be on policies, but here's the problem. Voters now care more about the persona of the candidate, the character, the attributes of the candidate, than they do about where they stand. And that's not something that we can change. That's something that the media focuses on. It's something that the strategists focus on. And it's something, and they focus on it because that's what voters want to know. But I agree with you. I want to assert you are correct that they're too personality driven. The only way that you change that is by demanding policy rather than politics. And it's one of the reasons why I think we should stop doing so much focus on the polling and do a lot more focus on policy and the future, so we know what these candidates are going to do if and when they are elected. Great first question.
Frank, a question for you. Once your focus group was over, what was the result of the focus group? Did it change anyone's minds? Did anyone land on a candidate?
Yes, they did. I don't know if you're asking because you actually want to know, or you're asking because you do know and you want me to say it. 12 of the 14 moved towards Donald Trump. One of the 14 moved towards Joe Biden, and one stayed undecided. I have never in my professional life had such an overwhelming result to a presidential debate, to a general election presidential debate. It was absolutely incredible. And person after person talked about how much they regretted it, or talked about how they liked Joe Biden at one point, or talked about how they disliked how Trump behaved. And then they said, but I can't get away from what Joe Biden, his performance. I can't get away from how much trouble he had articulating where he stood. And I got to tell you something. I did not see it until yesterday evening. After the debate was over, we went right to the focus group. I did not see Joe Biden coming off the stage. And I've had a couple of strokes over the last few years. So I know what it is to come to the lip, to walk downstairs and have some difficulty. If voters had seen that, because they're already into commentary, if voters had seen Biden coming off the stage, I think it would have added to a very bad night for him. But I don't want the Trump people to do this rah-rah thing, because he wasn't so great either. And in the end, if we want to get away from this ugliness and this divisiveness, and by the way, I have advice for C-SPAN, get away from the Republican line and the Democratic line and the independent line, and instead, let's do a call from the Northeast. Let's do a call from the Midwest. Let's do a call from California, Florida. If we want to get away from that, then we have to look the American people straight in the eye and tell the truth. This is what I teach. This is how I try to live. And that debate response was so overwhelming that, and it showed up in the polls, the flash polls that have Trump beating Biden by 2-1. And we know that there were a lot of Biden viewers watching. It's going to have an impact, but not a big one on his poll numbers when they start to release them over the next really 24 to 48 hours.
Let's hear from Barbara in East Point, Michigan on the Democrats line. Good morning, Barbara.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I went back, I am a Democrat, and I am really a Joe Biden supporter. I think he has wisdom and intelligence, and he just don't have the old body for it anymore. But I went back last night. CNN reran the debate, and I watched it. And I changed my mind. I was crushed at the end of the debate until I watched it again last night. And I definitely changed my mind. I am in Joe's camp 100%. My solution to this is let him give his delegates to Kamala, and then she can choose him as her vice president. I think it would be a winning ticket still. But the thing I want to know, I just can't see us electing Trump. It just, I have never been able to see it.
Barbara, can I ask you a question?
Than he did on the first one. I'm still with him.
Barbara, Frank wants to ask you a question.
I'm a pollster, so I want to ask. So when you watched it a second time, was your evaluation of Biden better than the first time you saw him on Thursday night, or was your second watching of the debate, were you more disappointed in him?
It was better. I don't know why. I was probably looking forward to the debate at the first time, and he looked really bad physically, and not real sharp mentally until I watched it the second time. The second time, he answered the questions. He was able to recall everything that they had done, everyone, and he does slip up every now and then on a answer. But Trump didn't answer a single thing.
So that's what's interesting, which is that people may come to reevaluate. And this happened in 1984. Ronald Reagan had a very bad first debate. In fact, it happened again in 2004 with George W. Bush. It happened in 2012 with Barack Obama against Mitt Romney. There have been cases where the incumbent does a really poor job and people are shocked and they move away from him. And they have the second debate and they perform much better. So the challenge for the Biden campaign is to put him up against Donald Trump in September, as they promised to do, and whether or not there will be a second debate. I take your point, and now it makes me want to ask my focus group to get them gathered again in a week or so and have them re-examine what they saw and see if there's been any change. But Barbara, you're from Michigan. You're from a state that really matters. You're a voter that really matters, and I appreciate your perspective.
Tommy in Georgia on the Republican line. Hi, Tommy.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well, thanks.
Well, I'm a black Republican. I believe in Republican principles. It's just that Donald Trump is not a real Republican. So when I watched the debate, Biden couldn't really articulate his stances on different policies, but Trump, he lied every time. He didn't answer any questions. He just went back to, I said, the polls, whatever the polls, immigration, then he talked about immigration. If polls talk about injustice or whatever, that's what he talked about. He just kept, like, the main things in the polls that he was winning in, that's what he was talking about. He never answered any other question. He just went straight to those poll answers. So I listened to Joe Biden a second time, and I listened to him more closely. I felt a lot more better, like the lady before me. I felt like, well, maybe he didn't do so as bad as I thought. And then after seeing him in public afterwards, he looked like he was back to his old self again. So I don't know what happened on the debate stage, but I definitely be cluing in on September, I think the 10th or 11th, because if he do the same performance, then somebody else will need to have to step in.
Well, let me add two things to that because I can provide perspective. First is that Trump is getting about 30% of the young African-American male vote, which has never happened before. And so he's making some inroads among the African-American community that is unprecedented. Now, they may go back to the Democrats, but in where the campaign stands right now, he is pulling votes that Republicans normally don't get. In terms of that second performance, and I agree with you in how you analyzed it, he did have a teleprompter. And you don't have a teleprompter in a debate. You don't have anyone whispering in your ear in a debate. It's just you alone up on stage. Now, here's the other issue, which is that Biden's campaign said that he had a cold. They didn't say anything about his health until the debate was already on, until he was already having trouble. And they were trying to explain why his voice was so weak. I'm not sure I believe that. If your candidate isn't healthy, why don't you tell people that the day of the event to lower expectations? Why don't you explain it at the beginning? Why didn't Biden himself say, look, I wish I was not debating with a 99-degree fever or having a cold, but this is what you have to do. You explain it to the American people. You don't use it as an excuse. Use it as an explanation. And they didn't do that. So that suggests to me that I don't know if it's grounded in truth. I don't want to call anyone dishonest, but his voice was not strong and his presentation was not strong. And it was exactly the opposite the next day when he spoke. So yeah, maybe there are two Joe Bidens. There's the one we saw on debate night and the one that we saw the day after. But in the end, the public is going to make the decision based on the debate night, because 15 million people were watching that evening. But that's a good comment.
Bruce, Lexington, Kentucky on the independent line. Hi, Bruce.
Hello. I hear you all talking about what they can do to save his candidacy, and you know, it was this, and Trump lied and lied. Let me tell you who lied. John Graham, the spokesman for the Trump that does the daily news updates or whatever, saying Biden is sharp as a tack. Come on, guys, we know that's not true. The news reporter saying, oh, I speak with him every day, he's sharp as a tack. It's obvious this guy's not sharp as a tack. Forget who we're getting, the Democrats are going to get elected to president. He's our president now, and our country, I think, is in peril. This man is not up to the task. And talking about different types of campaign strategies at this point, I think you're missing the point. Does anybody care about the security of our country right now?
Okay, I get it, and that's an interesting comment. I will tell you, I met with President Biden just before his graduation speech at West Point, and he was absolutely on. So I saw with my own eyes. It's the only time I've seen him actually in years was just before that speech, only time I've talked to him. And your point is well taken, and it's one of the reasons why voters did move towards Trump and was so frustrated with that debate. In the end, and I've been trying to measure this specifically, there is greater concern about foreign policy in this election than at any time since 2004. There's concern about the Middle East, and specifically the Israeli-Hamas conflict. There's more concern about Ukraine and Russia. There's more concern about China and Taiwan. So when they talk about foreign policy, the question then is the president up to it, number one? And two, is this the kind of image we want to project to the world? This became a topic in the focus group, but only briefly. But it was used as a reason why some voters had switched from undecided to Trump. They may not have agreed with his foreign policy, and they may not have liked his bluster, but they felt that he would better represent America, that he would be a stronger leader than Joe Biden. So your point is very well taken, and in fact, across the country, in these discussions, I do this every single week, I hold a focus group, I am hearing more and more concern about what does America show the world based on the situation with Joe Biden right now.
Let's hear from Edward in Battle Creek, Michigan on the Democrats line. Good morning, Edward.
Yes, good morning. I'm stunned at this comment by Frank Luntz, absolutely stunned. Do you think, let me ask about foreign policy, do you think under a Trump presidency we would pull out of NATO? Frank, maybe you can answer these questions because Trump doesn't seem to want to answer them. Or would we pull out of NATO? Would we withdraw our aid to Ukraine? Would Ukraine collapse? Would the Russians occupy and consolidate control of Ukraine? Would Russia continue to advance in Eastern Europe? What would Trump do? Would he call up his friend Vladimir Putin? Would he call up his friend Vladimir Putin and say, Vlad, I don't know if this is such a good idea about this Eastern European stuff. I mean, to me, the idea of pulling out of...
Can I respond? First off, I love the fact that you're pulling from Michigan voters because the state matters. Secondly, I'm going to do something I never do, which is on a personal level, I agree with the caller. I absolutely do. I don't know why we're talking about pulling out of NATO. I don't know why we are not providing the aid. I agree with the caller, but now let me go back to my pollster basis. It's not the policy in this case. It is, and the support, unfortunately, for Ukraine has dropped a little bit. It's the presentation. Why didn't Biden say this? Why didn't Biden communicate this? In that 90-minute debate, there were discussions of foreign policy, and Joe Biden didn't do it as well as the caller did. So I say to the caller, if Biden had been as articulate as you are, then maybe Trump would have been hurt by that. But he wasn't. And that's the issue. You can only evaluate someone based on what they say and don't say and how they say it. So I get your passion. I get your point of view. I do share it. But as a pollster, that is not how Joe Biden communicated on debate nights. And I'm sorry that he didn't.
Frank, after President Biden's performance, two headlines in the New York Times today. As Harris defends Biden, she builds a case for herself. And from the opinion pages, columnist Lydia Polgreen, the headline, Harris 2024 sounds pretty good right now. How does Vice President Harris factor into what we saw on Thursday and the potential election outcome?
More than people realize. By the way, this is a great show. You're asking, the callers are asking the right questions, making the right statements, and you're doing the same thing right now. Because based on Biden's performance, the single best line that I got from the focus group was a person who articulated, we're being asked to vote for Joe Biden for the next 4 years. I'm not so sure about Joe Biden over the next 4 months. So Harris, Vice President Harris's capabilities absolutely come into play. Just as Donald Trump's choice of vice president matters more now than it ever has. And that's probably something that he doesn't want to think about because he thinks it's all about him. And it's not. For the American people, I think this is going to be the most important vice presidential choice since John McCain chose Sarah Palin in 2008. Her numbers are not good. Her polling is not good. She's making the case for herself right now. She should have done this a year ago, 2 years ago. She was specifically given the immigration issue, and immigration is gaining and gaining all across the country, not just in border states, getting higher and higher as a priority. And right now, the two issues that matter most to the most number of people are the two I's, inflation, but it's actually affordability, and immigration. And she was nowhere to be seen. She never went to I don't want to do politics. I want to do what the public thinks. And her numbers are really poor. And there are other Democrats that I believe would be stronger. And if I may, you have Governor Westmore, who was over television yesterday from Maryland. You have Mitch Landrieu, who's a chief spokesman, former mayor of New Orleans. You have, of course, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, Cory Booker, the senator of New Jersey, Pete Buttigieg, Secretary of Transportation. All of these Democrats would be stronger candidates against Donald Trump than the vice president would be. So I'm sure that that's going to elicit a whole lot of other calls into your show. But there are Democrats who Donald Trump should be afraid of. And I don't believe it's going to become an issue because I do believe that Biden has decided to stay and that he's going to wait it out. But you had the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, I believe that was the newspaper, and you definitely had the New York Times calling on Biden to drop out. Individual columnists from across the spectrum have done the same thing. I don't think it'll be the vice president to replace Joe Biden. I think there are other candidates who will make a stronger claim that they are more electable.
Let's hear from Jerry in Broadway, Virginia on the Republican line. Good morning, Jerry.
Good morning. First off, I'd like to say we got on Thursday night, Joe Biden said he would be happy to take a cognitivity test, and he should do that tomorrow, and it should be witnessed by the House Oversight Committee. And another thing I'd like to talk about, all these fake news media outlets saying all these things about Trump lying through the debate. Those were not lies. Look, about the National Guard response on January 6th, numerous Senate and House hearings have proved that Trump did, in fact, authorize 10,000 National Guard for the Capitol on January 6th, and both Mayor Bowser and Nancy Pelosi said no, they do not want them.
So let me respond to two different comments. They did go through the debate. They went through the transcript, and things that Trump claims he never said, they have him on camera saying them. So you can't, are you going to believe your eyes? Are you going to believe your ears? He said that the stuff was made up. Well, they've got the video of him actually saying it. I'm not saying about the point that you raised, but on other issues. And secondly, these undecided voters still don't like his persona. Can you tell people about yourself rather than condemning your opponent? Can you tell people about what the next term will bring rather than condemning the last 4 years? That's what voters are asking for. In fact, if you want to write this down, because I know that there are Trump strategists watching and Biden strategists watching. Number one, Ask a rhetorical question. Ronald Reagan's, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Barack Obama, is this the hope and change we're looking for? Ask a rhetorical question. Number two, give 3 specific examples of how things have changed, for the better or for the worse. For Trump, he would talk about inflation and he would talk about immigration. For Joe Biden, he would talk about investment in infrastructure. He would talk about focusing on new technology. Third is to give people 3 different priorities for the future, what you're going to do on day 1, on day 100. Voters did not hear any of that. And fourth, some sort of audacious, really visionary look towards the future in some special way. I hate to tell you this, on all sides, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, neither candidate did that. So let's not say that Donald Trump didn't mislead people because they've got the video. And let's not say that Joe Biden is perfectly ready to serve another 4 years because we saw with our own eyes what we heard. And I just wish that there's some way that we could actually agree to disagree. And I applaud the callers up to this point for being reasonable, sensible, and responsible in their approach. And we have to accept that we don't agree, but we shouldn't do so with all the hate. There's something called the Dignity Index that Tim Shriver has been pushing, and it's really beautiful because it says that you can't, and also Disagree Better, which is a National Governors Association initiative. These are people who say we come from different perspectives, we have different ideas, but we have to find a way to disagree better, and we have to give people their dignity, which is exactly what has happened so far this morning.
Frank, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. didn't make the debate stage for Thursday's presidential debate, but he did hold an event where he answered the questions, the same questions, live in front of an audience. In your focus group, was anyone considering an alternative candidate, not Biden, not Trump? And what are their thoughts about a third party?
In fact, I think 4 of the 14 were actually leaning towards Robert Kennedy Jr. And if he's in the debate in September, he's going to be significant in November. For a third-party candidate to be viable, as Ross Perot was in 92 and 96, they have to be able to participate. And the reason why Robert Kennedy was not invited in is he's not on enough states to potentially win the election. You have to be on ballots of states that could give you 270 electoral votes. I believe that he will qualify for that by September. The second requirement is that you have to have at least 15% of the vote. And Kennedy's average in the polls done just before the debate was about 10%. Some a little bit above, some a little bit below. So it was correct, based on the rules, that he not be included. And it's up to him and his campaign to get on more state ballots and to push that percentage up to 15%. But yes, he will be a factor if he makes the debate stage in September, if we even have a debate.
What are the factors that are pulling voters toward a candidate like Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Is it an anti-Biden or Trump vote, or are they truly interested in just having somebody else as an option?
Great question. It's about a third, a third, a third. 1/3 cannot vote for either Trump or Biden, so they're looking for a third party. 1/3 truly want a new voice. No Labels was trying to find a candidate and did not, and I think that that is probably the biggest disappointment of 2024, that they are choosing deliberately a third party to send a message to the rest of the country, and about a third are supporting Robert Kennedy because they simply like his agenda. So you really have to divide it 3 ways.
Let's hear from Debbie in Branson, Missouri on the Democrats line. Good morning, Debbie.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I'm just really concerned about the people are not thinking of down the road, and they're thinking about just right now, this minute. I know President Biden didn't sound the best, and I do really truthfully believe he had a head cold. You could just tell that he was not himself. And I know there's a certain amount of just pure shock that Trump will get up and he's going to just say the same things repetitively, not about, what he's going to do for the country, just, I'm the greatest it's ever been, and I did it all perfectly, and blah, blah, blah. I've never read the 2025 plan that he has, but I'm going to have to dig into that because I know the American people are never going to stand for the plan he has for us. And I think if he gets in power, we're never going to get him out.
So, Debbie, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I'm just curious. I don't mean to be personal, but I'm going to ask you a personal question. Do you have children?
Do I have children?
Yes.
Is that what you said? Yes, I have children.
You have grandchildren?
And grandchildren. 7. Yeah,
7.
And 1
Wow.
great.
Congratulations. How old is the oldest and how old is the youngest?
My oldest child is 42 and my youngest is 35.
Your
My
grandchildren?
oldest grandson is 23.
So your grandchild gets to vote. This is something that I've been saying every time I get the chance to do so, which is don't vote for this election, vote for the next generation. That the election
I believe that.
is not about 2024, it's about 2044 and 2050.
That's right.
And you and I are on the same page there. And I think it's important that to save this democracy, to return to where we once were as a country, where we were at least more unified, where we respected election results, where we respected each other. We would still disagree, but we appreciated the other point of view. I'm asking people not to vote for what you want right now, but to think of your children, and in your case, your grandchildren, and what's best for them. So again, I got to say to C-SPAN, we're on the same page. And notice how respectful everyone has been this morning. I love this, and I love the give and take, and I apologize for asking you all questions, but you're teaching me as a pollster as we do it. And I'll make an offer to C-SPAN that we should do a focus group. We could actually put undecided voters or voters who really care about it. We could do a live Zoom focus group, and you could see all of America in front of you. We could put someone from every state in the country up there, because in the end, your voice matters. Your commitment matters. Your vote matters. And it's never mattered more than it does right now in 2024.
Let's hear from Bobby in St. Paul, Minnesota on the independent line. Good morning, Bobby.
Good morning. Good morning, Frank. Thank you for taking my call. Frank, there's a saying, what has one side? And that's the truth. And that's what we saw Thursday night. We had all this spin coming in about how sharp he is and his cognitive ability. And the Robert Hur from the Justice Department, what his synopsis was about the President Biden, is an older man with some cognitive ability and something to that effect. Oh my God, what is he saying? And then you had an article, I think it was the Wall Street Journal that came out, said, hey, people in the background are saying the Don's kind of slipping a little bit. And then, well, God, how can you say that? And then we saw it. And, the other expression I always had on my desk before I retired, Frank, was you don't have a second chance to make a first impression. Okay. Now, the spin has been...
Can I jump in? I want to give you credit. And I want to pick up my phone, but I don't want to do it on camera because I want to write both of those down. So I teach at West Point. And I can tell you right now, caller, I think your name is Bob. If you're still on, I want to call you by your first name.
Well, I grew up in New York, and it was Bobby when I was a kid. I'm 78 years old.
Okay, well, I'll call you Bobby. I'll give you credit for being a kid. I want you to know that I'm going to teach my West Point cadets the 2 lines that you just said. It's going to open up my class in the fall. One is only one side, the truth, and you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. You have so impacted me with those comments, and I really appreciate it. It's funny that you're from a state that's now in play, and I know St. Paul a little bit because I like your hockey team. You're correct. And in the end, the Democrats believe that the Republicans are lying. The Republicans believe the Democrats are lying. Most Americans believe most politicians don't tell the truth. And that's the sad state of affairs that we're in. I'm going to give you one statistic right now. 83% of Americans believe this is the most divided that we have ever been as a country. And among those over age 65, which I realize is a fair number of people who watch the C-SPAN in the morning, it's 92%. And you all lived through Kent State. You lived through the assassinations of Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King. You lived through the cities burning down. You lived through the destruction of the economy and double-digit inflation. You lived through the Vietnam War protests and Chicago 68. And yet you say we're more divided now. If we can remember your two statements and teach that to every young person, the truth only has one side, and you only have one chance to make a good first impression. I think that's the beginning of getting back on the right track as a country and as a society. So of all the calls, this one's my favorite so far.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Jeff in North Carolina on the Republican line. Hi, Jeff.
Hi. How you doing, Frank?
I'm fine. In your state, your state actually, Trump now has a 5-point advantage. So it still qualifies as a swing state, but North Carolina seems to be moving towards Trump right now, which is a real concern to the Biden campaign.
Oh, Trump's going to win for the third time in North Carolina, no doubt. And that little rally had Raleigh, those were just a bunch of, little students and stuff out on spring break or something, out summer camp. Anyhow, I also want to say that the debate just exposed how the Joe Biden and the whole Democrat Party and the mainstream media, especially CNN and MSDNC, has been lying to the American people the past 4 years. They've been propping this guy up and hiding him and saying how great he is. And we've all been lied to over the past 4 years.
Okay, hold on. Each one communicates to their own audience. So if you watch MSNBC, you get one view. If you watch Fox, you get another view. I think that's one of the problems in the country. And I'll give you the conclusion here. We watch news to affirm us rather than inform us. So what I tell Republicans is to please, at least for 10, 15 minutes a day, watch MSNBC. I say to Democrats for 10 or 15 minutes a day, watch Fox News. You need to know what your opposition, and they're not your enemy. I want to emphasize that. They're not your enemy. So we may disagree with perspective. We may even disagree with outcome. But it's not about dividing a country. At least it shouldn't be. We need to know the truth. As the previous caller said, there is only one truth. So I get your anger and I get your frustration. MSNBC is going to continue to report it their way. Fox will report it their way. C-SPAN makes sure that they have the Democratic voice, the Republican voice, and the independent voice. But in the end, I hope that by the time this election is over, we have an American voice. It's what we deserve, it's what we want, it's what we need, and it's what we deserve, an American voice.
Frank talking about North Carolina, a headline in the Wall Street Journal, Biden is pouring millions into a state Democrats haven't won since 2008. Democratic incumbent faces steep challenges in North Carolina, but seeks alternative paths to 270 electoral college votes. Let's hear from Anthony in Kentucky on the Democrats line. Good morning, Anthony.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for taking my call.
Go ahead, Anthony.
Okay, I just wanted to talk about Biden's supposed cold at the debate. I suspect it was COVID. I think it's estimated about 25% of respiratory symptoms in circulation are probably COVID, and it's rising again. It's something both presidents have downplayed and ignored. They tried to push it aside. Trump said it would go away, and that he would stop all testing. Well, with Biden, testing has stopped, and cases are now undetected. You can only find statistics about cases on like wastewater, where your local wastewater plants test the water for COVID virus that people are shedding through their bowels, into the wastewater. So that's the only data we have on COVID spread right now. While it's still a hugely dangerous and unknown disease, we don't know enough about.
I want us to be careful here because a lot of people do tune in, and I want to be really careful not to push theories that we have no evidence or no facts behind. Second is that Joe Biden, if he had COVID, then he got miraculously better the next day because his performance on Friday was really, really sharp. And you don't go from having a bad performance Thursday night to being totally healthy and totally back. So I don't think this was COVID. I think he simply had a bad night, a really bad night on Thursday, and a really good day on Friday. And I think it's helped save his campaign. But your caller, you do raise a legitimate point that we have to take these situations like COVID seriously. We have lost our faith in science. We've lost our faith in medicine. And I'm nervous that the next time that we have some sort of outbreak, we won't do the right thing. And I wish that it had been more of a conversation because the policy differences between Biden and Trump on COVID were significant. And it was only a tiny, tiny fraction, maybe a few seconds of the debate. But again, the issue is the American people want to look forward. They don't want to look back. They want to know what you're going to do next year, not what you did last year or 5 years ago. And they're not getting that. So I accept your concern. And I just want to refocus it on ensuring that we still prioritize science, that we still prioritize education, that we still prioritize, most importantly, the truth. I got that caller from St. Paul, Bobby from St. Paul. You're going to have an impact on me for the entire day. The truth matters, and we have to focus on figuring out what the truth is and then promoting it.
We have time for one last call. We will hear from Pat in Idaho on the independent line. Hi, Pat.
Excuse me. Hi. Thank you for having me. I think what I've been seeing and through all this is so much anger, and it started way back when Trump was elected. And I think this has been a very...
Hold on. The anger actually started in 2000 when we had a tied election between Al Gore and George W. Bush.
Okay.
You can even go back further. The anger started with Ross Perot in 1992, which is why Perot got 19% of the vote as an independent back then. So we've been a pretty angry country now for 30 years.
Okay, but the thing is, the news media has been putting a lot of their own personal feelings, I feel, into an election that has caused even more anger among people because we don't have any place to go. We depend on the media to give us facts and the truth. And it's been shown on both ends of the news media, the personal things that they say towards something that, that happens. And I think that the news media is the one that controls the volume of anger of people. And then, of course, when COVID hit, it was even more so because people didn't have any place to go.
Let's get a response, Pat. We're running short on time.
And the answer is change the channel. If you don't like what the correspondent is saying, if you don't agree with the tone of what you're watching, change the channel. We have so many news sources now, not just MSNBC, Fox, and CNN. We have CNBC. We have the BBC. We have more ability through this camera. I'm talking online right now to you all across the country. You can get your news from any one of 50 or even 100 different sources. So if you don't like what you're watching or you think it's problematic, change the channel. That is why we are so lucky to live in this country. I can't believe I'm about to do this, but I'm going to end on a positive note. And my students know how negative I can get. We're so lucky to live in America at this point when there are an infinite number of people, an infinite number of places where we can get news, get information, and we have the right to challenge it, just as you have done over the last hour. Hey, C-SPAN viewers, you've been fantastic this morning. I'm glad that you participate. You always say thank you for taking my call. I thank you for putting in the time to make that phone call, for sitting on hold. Thank you for watching the debate. Thank you for teaching your children and your grandchildren that this democracy is worth fighting for. Thank you for disagreeing respectfully. And C-SPAN, thank you for bringing America to America.
Frank Luntz, pollster and communication strategist. You can find him online at filuntz.com and on X at Frank Luntz. Frank, thank you so much for being with us this morning. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's been an honor.